There are just 8 days to go until Britain hits the polls. I'm Jack Elsom, and this is Never Mind the Ballots election countdown. In today's headlines, heated exchanges as Kemi Badenoch blasts David Tennant, calling him a rich lefty after the Doctor Who star told her to shut up in the latest trans row. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage rages at France over Channel migrant crossings. And I'll also be joined by the Health Secretary Victoria Atkins as a fifth Tory is investigated for the election betting scandal. And joining me in the studio today is the Sun's Home Affairs correspondent, Julia Atherley. But before I come to you, Julia, I'll be speaking to the Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins. Good morning, Victoria Atkins. How are you?
Good morning. Very well, thank you. The sun is shining in rural Lincolnshire.
Fantastic. Glad to hear it. Well, anyway, let's start with this betting scandal. Pretty extraordinary. More people from the Labour Party and Tories dragged in last night. We know of 5 current Conservative figures under investigation by the Gambling Commission. Are we going to get any more come out?
Well, Jack, can I say how angry and disappointed I was when these allegations first started coming to light. I'm not, as you'll appreciate, in any way involved in either the Gambling Commission's investigations or indeed in our own internal investigations. It wouldn't be right for me to be so. So I in terms of your question, obviously we're going to let those investigations run their course.
Your cabinet colleague, Alistair Jack, says that he won £100 betting on the time of the election, says that he broke no rules, however, and isn't under investigation currently. You're a senior politician. Would you ever bet on the timing of an election or anything political for that matter?
No, and Jack, betting is very much not my thing. In fact, I've just remembered that I am probably one of the few people that when I went to Las Vegas on holiday, I didn't lay a single bet. So I'm certainly not into any betting of that kind either. But
maybe not you, but obviously some of your colleagues are. Should there be some sort of nationwide ban on politicians making any kind of bets on what happens at Westminster or politics in general? Because, you know, often the charge levelled at politicians is that they're all on the make and they're in it for themselves. And, you know, the latest scandal in the last few weeks just really gives succour to those allegations, don't they?
Well, I think if I've got to put, if I may, the investigations to one side, just because I'm very conscious that the story is developing, particularly with people outside of the Conservative Party, you know, including the Labour Party and others. So I mustn't comment on those. More generally, I mean, look, I've never laid a political bet in my life. It wouldn't occur to me to do so. And the fact that there has been this public discourse and distaste about it, first of all, I would hope anyone even thinking of it would think twice and not do so. But I think, yes, that we should certainly have a longer term conversation about that, because I can well understand why people are upset about it, but also why we are frustrated that in the middle of a general election campaign we want to be talking about our policies, and obviously I'd love to talk about my health policies. We want to talk about that because we've got this enormous democratic test in just over a week's time, and that's what we should be focusing on.
Completely. We will talk about that just shortly. Just finally on this betting saga, Craig Williams and Laura Saunders obviously came out. They were being investigated a few days ago. I think Craig Williams was actually last week. Why did it take the Prime Minister so long to suspend them as candidates, and what changed his mind?
Well, again, I genuinely, I always try, as you know, Jack, to answer your questions, but I'm being completely upfront when I say I've not had any involvement in this, and it wouldn't be right for me as Health Secretary to have an involvement in either the investigations that are ongoing, but also the Prime Minister's decisions on this. What I do know is, as has become clear from the reporting in the press, these are complicated matters. There are a number of individuals involved. And so, as with everything else in terms of the way that the Prime Minister conducts himself, he's wanted to ensure that proper processes are followed, that the investigations are given the time and the space they need. But he has decided, as he said quite forcefully, actually, I think the other night, that should investigations reveal that anyone associated with the Conservative Party has done anything wrong, then they will be kicked out of the party immediately. And I think that's the right message to be sent. Yeah,
and it's a very clear pledge. Let's talk about something that you can definitely discuss, the NHS. We've got more junior doctors' strikes tomorrow. I remember when you first were appointed Health Secretary, you took much more of a conciliatory approach than perhaps your predecessor. You were very keen not to attack the BMA. But you failed there, haven't you? We now have the 11th strike starting tomorrow. Is this a personal failure on your behalf?
Well, when I came in, Jack, you're right. Not only were we facing strikes by the Junior Doctors Committee, but we also had the threat of strikes from consultants and indeed another cohort of doctors called the specialty doctors or SAS doctors were concerned as well. I'm really pleased to be able to tell your viewers that, of course, I've managed to reach agreement with both consultants and with SAS doctors. So that is that's going to have real benefits for us all as patients. But the Junior Doctors Committee they are still outstanding. I've done everything I can. I've been in the room with them. It makes me laugh when Labour says they're going to get in the room with them. Well, I have been in the room with them. They keep walking out. This final strike that they have called during the election period, when they know, because they were advised by civil servants, that I cannot, forgive me, I cannot offer a deal, in the way that they are suggesting. I couldn't do that, and still they've decided to strike. And what this means is that patients who should be getting time-critical, urgent treatments, they have been, the NHS has been managing this well over the last couple of weeks, but they are not getting the treatment they need. And that is the problem that I have. I do not understand how the Junior Doctors Committee thinks that it is responsible to call strikes at this time when they know full well the harm that presents to patients.
So what is it about the BMA? Are they just a Tory-hating union? Is this a political strike? Is this a nakedly political act to try and sabotage the Tories in the middle of a general election?
Well, I mean, I think your viewers will draw their own conclusions. I wanted to make.
What's your conclusion? Are they political?
I'm afraid this strike in the general election campaign, that was an announcement that I think not just us as patients, because I'm a patient of the NHS, not just us as patients, but also I'm afraid other medical professionals looked on with both surprise but also dismay, because we all recognise the election period is a time where governments can't make major spending commitments. Generally, and so that we were very, very angry that the Junior Doctors Committee decided to call a strike in this time when we as a whole, we as a nation, of course, are focusing on policies, we're focusing on the future plans of our party and others, and it feels very wrong. And I wouldn't mind, but I genuinely have tried to find a settlement with the junior doctors. And what is more, a couple of months ago, because I said to the Junior Doctors Committee, if I were in their shoes, I wouldn't just be focusing on pay. I'd also be looking at the working conditions of junior doctors, because I think there are some genuine concerns there. 2 months ago, I delivered a programme of improving working conditions because I'm absolutely committed to helping.
You're talking about the achievements you had, and I think that some of them are very legitimate. But why is the NHS barely featured in this election campaign at all? I've hardly heard the Prime Minister talking about it. Why is the reason for this? Have you got nothing to shout about? Is he reluctant to talk about it? What's the issue here?
Well, gosh, Jack, I was one of the first cabinet ministers out with policies at the beginning of the campaign. I appreciate the campaign has felt a bit long, but
it certainly has.
We announced that we want to bring. We have got recovery plans in place for hospital care, so urgent and emergency care. We have recovery plans in place for getting the waiting list down, and we've seen some real progress.
How's that going? Because they're up, aren't they? They're 7.5 million.
Well, we have seen some 200,000 fewer treatments on the waiting list in the last 7 months. That's good news, obviously, for the patients, but also that's despite industrial action, and we have plans in place to further improve that. What worries me is that my opposite number is making promises about waiting lists that I don't think he quite understands, both how things have changed since Labour were last in power. We have, for example, 4 million more people walking through the doors of A&E this year than we did in 2010, and we are working with those people. We're delivering 25 million more outpatient appointments than we were when we inherited the NHS in 2010. We're delivering 11 million more diagnostic tests than we were in 2010. And
Victoria,
indeed, you yourself, Jack, have been with me on a visit to a community diagnostic
I have
centre
indeed.
to see some of the ways in which we're reforming the NHS to help bring diagnoses much more quickly to people. But we want to go further. We're rolling out surgical hubs, and what is more, we want to build more GP practices and refurbish GP practices, because we want to bring healthcare closer to
all very good points. I'm running out of time, so I quite like to chat about something which you talked about yesterday, which was about trans issues. Your cabinet colleague Kemi Badenoch lashed out last night at David Tennant, who I think suggested that she shouldn't exist because of her views on trans rights. Where do you stand in this war of words between Kemi Badenoch and Doctor Who?
I find it extraordinary that anyone in public life would think it's okay to say that he wishes a female politician talking in a measured way about an important and sensitive topic of our time that concerns many people, not least women who do not wish to be eradicated from our language because of the activities of trans activists. I find it extraordinary that he thought it appropriate to speak in these terms. He knows, surely, the security risks that we all face in politics, but particular people face as well. And I find it extraordinary he thought that it was appropriate to say this. But can I say, he's a Labour Party supporter, and this is symptomatic of what the left does. If they don't like your views, then they try to shut you up. And this is exactly what has happened with the trans debate. It's why, for example, my opposite number, Wes Streeting, when he was asked about why women asking reasonable questions about why our rights have to be diminished in order to help and support trans people, he said, oh, just get over it. It's that dismissal of half the population that I find so troubling. And Kemi is absolutely right that this is a hint, I think, of the sort of cancel culture that we know already exists with the left and left-wing people. And my worry is that if Labour gets anywhere near power, we are going to see much more of this. So my call to everyone is, please don't listen to actors spouting forth on the stage. We are all entitled to our views. We are all entitled to express them in a lawful and gentle and caring manner. That is exactly what I and Kemi have been doing on this very sensitive topic, and it is simply not good enough for a male actor to try and shut us up.
Victoria Atkins, people would have heard you loud and clear. Just finally, 8 days to go until polling day. Are the Conservative Party still in the fight?
Very much so, and this is why not only am I on your programme, but I'm out campaigning today in my beautiful constituency of Louth and Horncastle as the Conservative candidate. But also, the one point I would like to leave with in viewers' minds is look at the evidence. We've got plans in place, particularly with the National Health Service. We are beginning to make real progress since the pandemic. But if you look at Labour's record in Wales, where they run the NHS, they run it, not me, and they have the longest waiting times in Great Britain. People are waiting on average 6 weeks longer in Wales than they do here in England. Indeed, people flee Wales, Labour-run Wales, to get treated in England. And if one might ask, why are Labour's plans, if they're so great, why are they not working?
Well, people might say that the health service in England isn't exactly tickety-boo at the moment. But Victoria Atkins, I very much appreciate you coming on.
We're beginning to see progress. I appreciate, I feel people's frustrations. I use the NHS. The NHS is genuinely one of the reasons I came into politics, because I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 3. I'm absolutely determined to make progress with the NHS, and we are seeing more people being treated, more doctors, more nurses, more investment than ever before. That is great news, but I absolutely will keep working on your behalf.
Victoria Atkins, thank you very much for coming on. I hope you have a I hope you have a sunny day out on the campaign trail, and thank you very much for your time as always. Thank you.
Thanks.
Right, and now Julia, what did you make of that interview? Obviously, we started with betting. Victoria Atkins obviously saying that this isn't a good thing and it's distracting from the election campaign. But, this is awful for the Conservative Party, isn't it, at the moment?
I mean, we've got just over a week to go until the election. You can hear how frustrated she is. This is taking away, she wants to talk about the NHS, which we've barely talked about during this campaign. And instead, she's having to come on here and talk about how her colleagues having to defend themselves. Obviously, she can't talk about the ongoing investigation, but this is really taking up so much time. We're now focusing on what could be another, MP sleaze scandal. We kind of mentioned Partygate, things like that in the past. Is that becoming another one of those? She's frustrated. She's clearly not a betting woman herself. This isn't something that she does. So you can, she's very, very frustrated.
Yeah, massively so. And also, Labour have been very keen to sort of ham this up, punch the Tory bruise in this for the past couple of days. One of their own candidates last night got dragged into the scandal, being investigated by the Gambling Commission. What do we know about him?
So this is the candidate who was actually bet against himself.
Extraordinary.
In his own constituency, which is completely mad. He said it was because it was when he thought that he had no chance of winning the election. I don't think we know how much he's actually placed on that bet yet. But it's quite an extraordinary thing to do as someone in public office to be betting against themselves.
Betting against yourself to lose. I mean, that is absolutely extraordinary. And Labour have suspended him as a candidate, Kevin Craig, down in Ipswich, I think. We obviously did talk about the NHS a bit. Hasn't been something which has really featured front and centre of this campaign, largely been about tax and immigration, which I'm sure we'll get onto. These junior doctor strikes tomorrow, they're not helpful, are they?
She, again, sounds incredibly frustrated about this. And I think her argument there was, my hands are tied on this one. I can't do anything. I can't talk to them during the election campaign. But I think for voters, they can see, this isn't just a dispute which has started yesterday. It's been long-standing dispute. She's been the person in charge of the health service, and she's not managed to resolve it. So I think for voters, I'm not sure that I'm not sure that really sticks. And
the question now for Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting, the Labour Party, is how would they resolve it? Because the junior doctors asking for 35%. Obviously, the Tories aren't giving it to them. Labour said that they wouldn't give it to them either, but seemed to suggest that they would get in the room and be able to broker some sort of deal. I mean, how realistic is that under a Labour government?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of you heard from Victoria there. They have been in the room with them. It's not as if these discussions haven't been ongoing. And I'm not sure Labour have quite, they're not committed to 35% either. And I don't think the junior doctors will back down easily on that. So I think this might be something that carries on. I don't think it's going to be an overnight success for the Labour Party if they were to win.
Fantastic. Well, stay with me, Julia. After this, we've got a senior Druid king, Arthur Pendragon, throwing his sword into the parliamentary ring. Now, let's check in with Nigel Farage. He's been out and about. I think he's been on the channel, hasn't he? Looking at small boats. There he is, pointing at I think maybe a small boat in the distance. Nigel Farage obviously using immigration as a key selling point for the Reform Party in this campaign. He's called it the immigration election. How's he getting on so far?
He's doing pretty well, isn't he? I think when we look at, that there's been more than 12,000 people crossing the channel on small boats this year alone. That points to the fact that the Tories aren't particularly coming up with any solutions. They say Rwanda's going to happen, but, it's not worked as a deterrent so far. I don't think Labour are coming up with any amazing solutions. So he's kind of pointing as his party as, the solution. They're not doing anything, so vote Reform.
But he's saying the French need to be taking these people back, and that the Royal Marines or the Navy should be drafted in. So as soon as they come over here, they should be taken straight back to France. Some people would see that as the ultimate deterrent, but how realistic is that as an option?
Yeah, I mean, I think if that was, an overnight solution, I think it would have happened already.
Yep.
I don't think it's quite as easy as just putting them back on the boat and sending them back. It doesn't really work like that. But look, I mean, this is something where, it's very visual. Voters are seeing it and they're seeing how it's not working. They're seeing people coming over in, 12,000 people so far this year. So, he's pointing to quite radical solutions. Whether or not they can actually work in reality is another question.
Yeah, I mean, he's been very critical of the French. Obviously, we're giving them about 500 million quid taxpayer cash for their help stopping the boats. It's not working, is it? We're seeing boats come over every single day. Like you said, 12,000 people this year alone, 50,000 since Sunak became Prime Minister. What are we paying them for at the moment?
Yeah, so at the moment that money goes to police officers, surveillance, things like that. And I think there's a lot going on in the ground in Calais that we don't see. We see the visual of small boats coming across almost every day now. But I think a lot of people are frustrated, and you say that's a lot of money. He's asking what can we use to fund that instead?
Yeah, and Keir Starmer has said that he would actually reopen that settlement. It's a multi-year settlement we got with Emmanuel Macron. How likely is he to get more bang for our buck, do you think, if he sort of manages to go over to Paris and say, at the moment, guys, you're not stepping up, we need you to do more, otherwise we're not going to be giving you any more money?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not as if this is the small boats crisis. It's not just happened overnight. Kind of relationships with Calais and with Macron, I'm not entirely sure how Starmer's going to resolve that.
And Starmer's obviously been talking a lot as well about processing this current asylum backlog. Tens of thousands of people currently in hotels, massive cost to the taxpayer. He said that he'd process them. As Harry Cole pointed out in the Sun's election showdown earlier this week, the 65% grant rate, that's a pretty good odds if you're a migrant in Calais. You come over here and a 65% chance you might get to stay. It's his promise to let asylum seekers who are currently unable to have their asylum claims processed be processed and go through the system. Is that really a deterrent?
It's pretty good odds, isn't it? And so without the Rwanda flights taking off, which is looking increasingly less and less likely, you'd probably take those odds and you probably would still cross and you'd still take that incredibly dangerous journey if we are to believe that they're listening to the polls and they're reading what's happening in our election. I think 65% is a pretty good chance. And
let's just quickly come back to Nigel Farage, because he has said that he is going to get around 6 million votes, he thinks. Enormous amount of votes for what was a minor party until a few months ago. Is that going to shake down into actual seats in the House of Commons in a few days' time, or is he going to be left with maybe 1 or 2 or maybe even no seats? So famously, obviously, when he was with UKIP, they won 1 million votes and that didn't translate to any seats in the election. So it's going to really come down constituency by constituency. He's got a pretty good chance in Clacton, so I think there's a pretty good chance that we're going to see Nigel Farage in the Commons. Whether or not any of his other candidates succeed, we'll have to see. Fantastic. And just one more quick question. Obviously, Nigel Farage is no stranger to being attacked in public. He's been milkshaked, I think, twice, so things thrown at him. In that interview with Victoria Atkins, we talked about Kemi Badenoch, and she sort of seemed to suggest that David Tennant was stoking security concerns around her, saying that, by calling for her not to exist, he could potentially be invoking some sort of safety threats. How much of a problem is this at the moment in public life? I think it's a real problem. I think, people joke about milkshakes being thrown, but it's not that much of a step for it to become a lot worse. It has happened in the past, so I don't think it's something we can joke about. And I think if it was a right-wing kind of activist talking about a left-wing politician not wanting them to exist, I think we'd be having a very different conversation. In other election news, we have a senior druid, King Arthur Pendragon, standing as a candidate for Westminster. Who is this bloke? Why on earth is he standing? Look at him with his cloak and his sort of ancient robes. Do we know anything about this guy? This is the Sun's druid. He has been predicting the football scores for us, but he also is running to be an MP in Salisbury. I think it's not the first time. It's the fifth time I think he's run. I read here he's previously called John Rothwell. He changed his name in 1986 by deed poll to match that of the mythical King Arthur. And he says that he wants to return to spirituality in politics. He's a no-hoper, isn't he? Look at what we've had previously. I think give him a go, maybe. He's the Count Binface of Salisbury. Maybe if the polls and the song lines perhaps are aligned, he might have a better chance. But I'm not sure. We're going to see him on the House of Commons anytime soon. Julia, thank you so much for joining me today. And obviously, thank you to Victoria Atkins as well. This was Never Mind the Ballots, Election Countdown. And remember, you can subscribe to us on youtube.com/@sunelection. Thank you.